So, just 3 days ago, on March 25, 2026, the UN General Assembly adopted what is honestly a deeply historic resolution.
Yeah, historic is almost an understatement.
Right. They officially declared the transatlantic slave trade the, quote, most serious crime against humanity.
And, you'd think that would be a universally accepted statement today.
You would think. But 123 nations voted for it, while the United States actually voted no.
Wow.
Yeah, and then the entire European Union, along with the UK, they refused to vote at all. They abstained.
Which is wild. So today we are diving into a massive stack of sources to figure out why this 400-year-old horror has suddenly triggered like an intense modern-day legal panic across the Western world.
Exactly, because these documents, they're doing way more than just arguing over history.
Oh, absolutely. They are exposing the hidden architectural blueprints of our modern global economy.
Right.
And they're also unleashing these completely unexpected demands for massive financial and cultural reparations.
Which is a huge flashpoint. But we are also looking at this really radical, highly politicized dissenting document that comes from entirely outside the UN.
Yeah, that document is intense.
It violently rejects this UN resolution, but not to protect Western treasuries like the other objections. The author claims the UN is basically using history as a smokescreen to ignore real-time, present-day atrocities.
It is a profound collision. I mean, we were essentially watching multiple factions fight over who gets to define justice.
Right. Who owes what to whom?
Exactly. And whether the past can ever truly be legally settled.
But before we jump in, a quick heads up for you, our listener.
Yeah, this is really important to state up front.
The documents we're unpacking today dive into some incredibly raw, ongoing global conflicts, specifically regarding Israel and Palestine.
Right.
And I want to make it abundantly clear that our goal here is not to take a side or validate any specific legal stand.
No, not at all. We aren't telling you what to think.
Right. We are just here as impartial guides. We're going to open up these documents, show you the raw arguments exactly as they were presented by the original authors, and just help you understand the mechanics of this massive diplomatic collision.
We're literally just looking at the machinery of these arguments. Nothing more, nothing less.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand why a vote about something that ended centuries ago caused a diplomatic earthquake in 2026, you really first have to look at the draft resolution itself.
Yes, formerly known as A80L.48, and it was spearheaded by Ghana and the African Group.
And reading through this, I was struck by how it doesn't just issue a generic condemnation of slavery.
Oh, no, not at all.
It operates like a meticulously researched criminal indictment.
The African Union and the resolution's authors, they brought receipts.
They really did.
They didn't frame the transatlantic slave trade as just, an unfortunate era or some tragic byproduct of global exploration.
Right, they were super specific.
Their core argument is that specific, systemic legal mechanisms spanning from the 15th to the 19th centuries actively birthed what they term a, quote, racial capitalist system.
They are pointing to the exact paperwork that engineered global inequality.
Exactly.
And they trace the origin point all the way back to the 15th century. They pull up these two papal bulls from 1452 and 1455.
Yeah, Dum Diversas and Romanus Pontifex.
Right. And these weren't just religious statements.
No, they had immense legal weight.
They were decrees that quite literally provided divine institutional authorization for European monarchs to invade, capture, and reduce African populations to, quote, perpetual servitude.
Which is just chilling to read. Those decrees functioned as the foundational permission slip for an entire global project.
A divine permission slip.
Yeah. And once that moral framework was established by, the highest earthly authority of the time, the extraction of human beings rapidly transformed into this cold, calculated accounting exercise.
Right, it became pure math.
The resolution explicitly calls out a Portuguese commercial mechanism from 1513 known as the Peça de Indias.
That specific mechanism is terrifying to read about. It legally defined enslaved Africans not as humans, but as units of accumulation.
They literally created a mathematical formula for human life.
Yeah. A healthy adult male was categorized as a full unit, a prime slave. But women, children, and the elderly were calculated on ledger books as fractions of that unit.
The Peça de Indias stripped away humanity and just replaced it with divisible math.
It's sickening.
It really is. And it established a precedent that swept across competing empires. Like, the resolution highlights the Dutch Charter of 1621.
Oh, right, where they formally classified Africans under Romano-Dutch law as res mobiles.
Yeah, movable goods.
Wow.
And then you see the French Code Noir of 1685, which went so far as to legally define enslaved people as, quote, furniture.
Furniture, just private property entirely stripped of any human rights or legal standing. As I was reading through this historical stack, though, the citation that genuinely stopped me in my tracks was the 1662 Virginia law.
Oh, yeah. The legal doctrine of partus sequitur ventrum.
Right, which translates to the child follows the willy.
Such a dark concept.
It is. This law stated that the legal status of a child was dictated entirely by the legal status of the mother. And if you think about how perverse that is...
It's essentially a biological form of corporate intellectual property.
Yes, exactly. If a modern tech company patents a genetically modified seed today, they legally own every subsequent crop that grows from it, forever.
Right.
Virginia applied that exact concept of perpetual self-replicating yield to human beings, ensuring that the yield of forced labor was self-replicating through the bodies of enslaved women.
What's fascinating here is the underlying structural argument being made by presenting all these specific laws together on the UN floor.
Right, the African group is demonstrating the why.
Yes. They're showing that this was the first system in world history to completely codify human beings as heritable, alienable property on a global scale.
It wasn't just a moral failing, it was a legal project.
And they are arguing that this legally sanctioned project permanently rewired global demographics. It built the racial and economic hierarchies that still function as the operating system of the world today.
So, okay, the UN floor is presented with 4 centuries of undeniable, documented historical horror.
Right.
You would naturally assume a resolution condemning this would pass unanimously.
You would think so.
But that is where the diplomatic facade crumbles. Like I mentioned earlier, 123 nations voted for it.
Which is a solid majority.
But 3 nations voted against: the United States, Argentina, and Israel. And 52 nations abstained, which critically included the UK and the entire European Union.
Right. And the friction here wasn't about whether slavery was horrific. Nobody was arguing that.
No.
The pushback from the U.S. and European nations was deeply rooted in the specific, highly charged legal terminology used in the resolution.
They aggressively opposed the phrase most serious crime against humanity.
Because of the word most.
Exactly. By declaring one specific historical system the most serious crime, the U.S. and EU argued the UN was actively creating a, quote, hierarchy of crimes.
And they claimed that ranking atrocities like legally stating that one genocide or system of enslavement sits above all others destabilizes the entire framework of international law.
And that destabilization is really what they fear.
Absolutely. The UK delegation leaned heavily into a concept called the intertemporal rule.
Okay, break that down for us.
So it's a bedrock principle in international law, which dictates that you can only judge historical actions by the laws that were firmly in place at the time those actions were committed.
So in plain terms, you cannot use the legal rulebook of 2026 to prosecute a 17th century empire.
Exactly. The UK warned that retroactively applying modern international law to centuries-old events creates this impossible legal paradox.
France abstoned as well, but their reasoning in the documents adds another layer to this.
Yeah, their stance was really nuanced.
They went out of their way to point out that they actually recognize slavery as a crime against humanity domestically, like 25 years ago with the Two-Bureau Law.
Right.
Yet, even with that domestic law on the books, they shared the EU's reservations about the international implications.
Because France was worried about applying something called jus cogens.
Right, jus cogens. Think of jus cogens as the supreme, undeniable laws of the planet, like the absolute ban on genocide, torture, or slavery that no country can ever opt out of or override.
And the Western argument is that you can't take a supreme planetary law established in the modern era and apply it backward to the 1500s.
The U.S. explicitly rejected the assertion that acts committed between the 15th and 19th centuries violated jus cogens, simply because that specific legal concept did not exist back then.
Right.
But hold on, I have to ask, is this intertemporal rule actually a genuine, necessary safeguard for the purity and coherence of international law?
Why?
Or is it just a highly sophisticated, beautifully phrased legal shield engineered by wealthy nations to permanently protect their treasuries from liability?
That is the exact tension at the heart of the UN debate. And it is the precise question nations from the global south were demanding answers to on the floor.
Guinea, Colombia, Nigeria, they vehemently rejected this Western legal framing.
They argued the intertemporal rule is being weaponized. Like Guinea took the floor to point out that no other historical crime has produced such massive, lasting economic consequences that actively shape the modern world.
Colombia highlighted the permanent demographic rewiring of entire continents.
And Nigeria emphasized that the enslaved people left from their shores, arguing that the origins of the crime demand a global reckoning that transcends, technical loopholes.
And this clash over liability bridges us directly into the true flashpoint of the resolution.
Yeah, the money.
The fight over the phrase most serious crime isn't just about historical pride or legal philosophy, it's about the massive price tag attached to that phrase. This resolution was an explicit demand for reparations.
The text of AADL.48 outlines a very comprehensive framework for, quote, restorative justice. And we aren't talking about formal toothless apologies here.
No, not at all.
The resolution explicitly demands restitution, compensation, and rehabilitation.
And the logistics of what they are demanding are incredibly complex. Like, the text calls for the immediate, unconditional return of cultural artifacts, artworks, manuscripts, and national archives.
Right. Think about what it means to demand national archives back.
It's not just returning a statue.
Exactly. It is reclaiming the actual historical memory and spiritual heritage of a nation that was looted and locked away in European museums.
And the African Union is heavily backing this. They've already declared 2025 as the year of, quote, justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations.
Real organized.
They really are. They even designated the entire decade from 2026 through 2036 as a decade of action dedicated to African heritage and restorative justice.
And the U.S. delegation's response to this was incredibly forceful. They stated on the record that they recognize absolutely no legal right to reparations for historical wrongs that were not illicit under international law when they were committed.
They categorically rejected the entire concept of restorative justice in this specific context.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we are seeing a fundamental fracture in how time itself is viewed in international relations.
Oh, that's an interesting way to put it.
Because Western nations, relying on the intertemporal rule, view the transatlantic slave trade as a crime locked safely behind thick historical glass.
Right. It was terrible, but the book is legally closed.
Exactly. But the Global South is arguing the exact opposite. They're saying the crime isn't in the past at all.
It is ongoing.
Yes. They argue that modern structural racism, global economic underdevelopment, and the massive wealth disparity between the global North and South, that all of it is the direct, unbroken continuation of those 15th century papal bulls and the Portuguese Peza de Indias.
The crime didn't stop. It just evolved into the modern banking and economic system. And that is why the label most serious crime is the ultimate legal trigger. If an ongoing crisis is classified as the most serious crime against humanity, the obligation to repair it isn't just a polite historical courtesy. Right. It becomes an active, immediate legal duty.
So inside the UN, you have this incredibly tense diplomatic war playing out over historical memory, structural wealth, and legal retroactivity.
But our source stack includes another document, and this one approaches this vote from a completely different universe.
Yeah, it's a text from entirely outside the UN bubble.
It violently rejects the resolution, but not because of the intertemporal rule, and definitely not to protect Western wealth.
No, it rejects the resolution because of present-day events.
Right. The author of this document claims that the UN is engaging in hypocritical theater.
And I'll remind our listener again, as we shift to this alternative perspective, we are strictly analyzing the arguments presented in this highly charged source text exactly as they were laid out.
The source is titled Text Calais, and it originates from a fringe alternative entity calling itself Regencyber, or sometimes Justice 360.
Authored by an individual named Khalid Omana.
Right. And there's a fascinating, almost dystopian detail here. The document explicitly notes that Omana was assisted by an AI, specifically ChatGPT 303.
Which is just wild. The very nature of this document is striking. You have a radical geopolitical dissent drafted with the assistance of advanced artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And it's formatted almost like a rogue judicial ruling.
Omana's central thesis unilaterally declares the UN vote null and void.
It completely and utterly rejects the label of greatest crime against humanity being applied to the historical transatlantic slave trade.
But if this entity is entirely focused on justice, you have to ask, why would they reject the global recognition of the horrors of slavery?
Because the text argues that right now, in real time, a genocide is being perpetrated against indigenous Palestinians.
The document specifically coins the term Palesticide to describe this.
It claims this present-day action is being committed by a, quote, mercenary army that operates with the carte blanche backing of the exact same UN member states who just cast votes on the slavery resolution.
So Omanist text doesn't just critique the UN, it explicitly calls out the 123 nations that voted for the slavery resolution, condemning them as, quote, indecent nations.
The document accuses the General Assembly of being entirely complicit in and incapable of stopping what the author terms the greatest suffering documented in real time.
And the core demand is absolute. The United Nations must fix the glaring, bleeding errors of the present before it has an ounce of moral authority to try and repair the past.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me from a philosophical standpoint.
Yeah.
By drafting a resolution that tries to define a historical event as the most serious or the greatest, the UN inadvertently turned global trauma into a zero-sum game.
Wow. Yeah, building a pedestal for the ultimate crime fundamentally changes the nature of the conversation.
Exactly. When you try to elevate the historical suffering of enslaved Africans to the absolute highest tier of human crimes, you are making a massive evidenced argument based on 400 years of data.
Right.
But by creating that top tier, the UN triggered a fierce backlash from a voice demanding immediate recognition for ongoing suffering.
Because if there's only one spot for the greatest crime, factions are going to fight over who belongs on it based on whose wounds are currently bleeding.
The Regencyber text essentially argues that moral high ground cannot exist retroactively.
Right.
You cannot claim to be a champion of historical justice while allegedly sponsoring or ignoring atrocities occurring in the present.
It dismisses the entire UN exercise as an attempt by the international community to basically launder its modern conscience using historical tragedies.
It is a stunning collision of timelines and perspectives.
It really is. I mean, you have Western nations arguing we cannot judge the past by the rules of the present.
Right.
You have the global South arguing that the past built the present, so liability remains totally active. And then you have this radical AI-assisted dissent arguing that the horrors of the present completely invalidate the UN's right to judge the past at all.
This raises an important question, synthesizing everything we've looked at today.
Go for it.
This deep dive reveals how a seemingly straightforward vote, a vote simply meant to acknowledge the undisputed, horrific reality of the transatlantic slave trade, is never just about history.
Never.
It is a complex, multi-front war. It is a battle over historical memory.
And a war over modern global wealth distribution.
Exactly, over restitution and the rigid frameworks of international law. And it is deeply, inextricably entangled with the bleeding wounds of current geopolitical conflicts.
And to you listening, this is exactly why reading beyond the headlines matters so much.
Absolutely.
A headline just says, UN votes on slavery resolution. It sounds like a simple, symbolic gesture.
But when you understand the invisible machinery underneath,
right. The intertemporal rules shielding treasuries, the 17th century corporate laws that birthed global inequality, the raw political anger of dissenting voices utilizing AI to strike back at the UN.
that is what actually allows you to see how the world is truly governed.
The bedrock of our global economy is infinitely more complicated and compromised than the skyscrapers sitting on top of it.
The past is highly active. Every legal mechanism we discussed today is still bearing weight in one way or another.
I want to leave you, our listener, with a final thought to mull over, something to explore on your own that builds on everything we've unpacked today.
Yeah, this is a good one.
If the intertemporal rule dictates that we can only judge historical actions by historical laws, what completely legal, universally accepted practices of our global economy today, right now in 2026, might be universally condemned as crimes against humanity a century from now?
That's a terrifying thought.
Will it be how we treat data, how we source our technology, how we interact with the environment? And when that day comes, will our descendants use these exact same international legal loopholes to avoid apologizing for us? Just think about what might be hiding in the foundation we are pouring today.
A profound question to end on.
Until next time, keep digging into the bedrock.